Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second session of day 17 of the VID19 Conference. I almost lost track of how many days that we've been running this for, so forgive me for a second. And we're joined by the wonderful Mark Butler, who's up in the beautiful Byron Bay.
Yeah.
He's going to help us go through We Can't Fix What We Can't See. But before we go through that, we need to be able to see you. So if you've could open the chat and make sure that the little blue box is set to all panelists and attendees, and then put a good hello, good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining from in the chat box. That would be great.
If you could let us know where you are as well, that would be very handy. It'd be nice to know.
We've got plenty of people joining.
Oh, great.
We've got Kim from Sydney, Pip, hi Pip from New Zealand.
Yeah, ora Pip, how are you?
I got the beautiful Mary Butler, good morning.
Never heard of her.
Never heard of her. Monique from Melbourne, Eric from Santa Monica. Hi, Eric.
Fantastic.
Nice to join. Nice of you to join from over in the States. Lots of great people. So, Mark, my friend, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Julia. That's great. Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here this morning, and I'd like to acknowledge a couple of things if I can. I'd love to give a great big virtual round of applause to Julia Steele for all the work she's done. Has been amazing, 17 out of 19 days, only 2 to go. But pulling all of this together in that space of time has just been incredible. So well done to you. I also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're on. For me, it's the Bundjalung people up here in the Northern Rivers, and pay my deepest respects to the leaders, past and present, and indeed emerging as well. So it's fantastic seeing everybody connecting in here. That's great. So we have a chat box. That's fantastic. Look, I might as well jump straight in here and share my screen with you. This one. Can everybody see that? Hang on a minute. There we go. So, okay, great. We can't fix what we can't see. I should probably put that into some context. That's a statement that came about in a conversation with a HR manager from an international film production company. We were talking about HR's sort of lack of visibility, and in that context it was the lack of visibility as a result of using an employee assistance program, an EAP. If you don't know what that is, stick it in, just let me know in the chat box with a yes or a no, and I can go into a little more detail on that. But of course there are a host of different reasons why HR might not be able to see the mindset or mental health issues that people might have in the workplace. Everything associated with, or anything associated with stigma or culture issues, leadership styles, workplace policies, working from remote locations, bullying, there's any number of reasons. But in this context, what we were talking about was the anonymity of working, of somebody using the employee assistance program. What it meant was HR didn't have visibility on who they needed to support. And no matter what the reason for that lack of visibility that we would need to improve and increase, would be the point that something is stopping the conversation in the workplace for people who are struggling. So today I'm going to talk about a number of different elements to this. We've got some interesting facts on mental health and mindset. We're going to talk about absenteeism versus presenteeism. Again, let me know in the chat box as we go whether that's a concept that's familiar to people or not. We're going to talk about understanding stigma, which is a large part of what we're talking about. Mary, can you see it? I've seen something pop up in the chat box there. I hope you can. How do we engage our people and our teams within an organization? And then we're going to look at strategies we can use to build awareness and to embed what we've learned and embed proper strategies for improving mental health in the workplace. So if that's my agenda for today. I do need to say that this is a research-based presentation, and I did start the research following that conversation around we can't fix what we can't see. I did start the research before the whole COVID-19 came upon us, so it was before the whole lockdown and people being stood down, people working remotely and working from home. But what I think it does tell us is the findings that I'll talk about are probably, they're actually as relevant, if not even more relevant and pertinent now as we face a new way of working. And the lack of visibility is probably greater now than it's ever been before. So as I say, in the earlier parts of this, we're going to be looking at a lot of statistics and a lot of numbers just to give us some background and some context as to what's happening in the workplace. I think as the years have gone on, I've lost the ability to remember names, but for some reason I'm pretty handy at remembering statistics. So I'm going to talk about what we're seeing in the workplace nowadays. You can see it on the screen yourself there. 30%, roughly, it's up or down. It varies slightly depending on the industry you're in, but 30% of your workforce will experience mental health in the workplace this year, if they're not already now. The general population number for that's around about 23%, but it's 30% in the workplace. And just over half of those, 15 to 16%, will go on to develop 2 or more mental health conditions. There's a reason for that. Generally, people don't seek help until it becomes overwhelming and they can't function on their own. And when that happens, a secondary condition tends to present itself. So if somebody was struggling with anxiety and it goes on for quite a while, what we would probably call chronic anxiety, depression quite often sets in just from being exhausted from trying to manage their anxiety. Other people will self-medicate to try and cope with the overwhelming feelings. Drinking to harmful levels, gambling, eating, shopping. There's any number of secondary conditions that can develop. Because the interesting thing with mental health is it doesn't tend to go away. It's not like a common cold where a week later you'll feel better. It can do sometimes, but that would speak to somebody's resilience more than anything else. Mental health tends to stick around until we do something about it. So again, talking about an employee assistance program, for those organizations that do have one, what we find is between 2 and 7% of your people will access the program in any given year. They're relatively healthy numbers. If it's less than 2%, I would say you've got an issue around people being aware of it. If it's greater than 7%, I think you've got some fairly solid culture issues and possibly leadership issues that need to be addressed. But no matter what that is, if 30% of your workforce is going to struggle with one issue this year, and 15 or more struggle with 2 issues, then between 2 and 7% accessing your employee assistance program might not be it's not enough, really. The other point is with employee assistance programs, the research tells us that 80% of the issues raised with an EAP are not work related at all. So we still have massive gaps between what we are able to do or what we've got visibility of and what's actually happening. You can see the next statistic I was going to talk about, 17% of people roughly seek help for their mindset or their mental health issues. And that's generally after they've been living with it for a while. Probably somebody has pointed out to them that, you're not traveling all that well, maybe you need to do something about it. The other interesting stat about with it in all of this, 71% of senior business owners and leaders state that their organization is committed to supporting people with mental health issues in the workplace. And less than half of their employees feel that that's actually the case. That's an interesting finding, because that then starts to speak to things like presenteeism and absenteeism, and indeed stigma as well. So when we talk about people approaching their organization, you're right, Monique, that is a big gap. It's really, really big, and we need to do more to address it. Stay tuned, we're heading there. The majority of employees will declare, this is research that's come out, I think this one was from Beyond Blue. The majority of employees are not comfortable disclosing their mental health condition in the workplace. There's a variety of reasons for that. A fear of being judged, fear of being seen less than, possibly worried about harming their career prospects or harming the position they've got, fear of being seen to be letting the team down. There's a great number of reasons why people would be reticent to disclose their mental health condition. And interestingly, more people are more likely to seek support from a colleague than from human resources. And for the reasons that I just explained as well. A lot of the time, I think it is fear of what it's going to do to their position. And generally, half of the people would not be confident in proactively approaching a colleague. So by that, what they mean is about half of those interviewed said that they would approach a colleague to talk to them about their mental health, but they feel that they may have enough confidence to know what to say to them and how to direct them to seek help. That number of that roughly half jumps to about 60% if they've already had a sort of a personal experience of mental health issues, either themselves or they work or live with somebody who has issues. So they're familiar with it, basically. So I wonder then how many understand the cost and effect of presenteeism. Is that a phrase that people are familiar with? Just jump in the chat box there very quickly and tell me if you've come across, familiar with it? Yes, yep. Okay, great. Well, I'll just look, we'll, not sure, Nosh. Okay. When we talk about presenteeism, obviously it's related to absenteeism, and I think most people pretty much know what that is. Absenteeism is when people don't turn up for work. There's a number of reasons. They're either sick, or they've got to look after the kids, or they've got to care for an elder family member. Number of reasons like that. The thing with absenteeism is it's tangible and it's measurable. If they're not there, they're not there. So you can very quickly put a dollar value on what that's costing the organization. Presenteeism is actually now a bigger issue and more costly, probably 4 times as costly if you read some of the research, than absenteeism is. And by presenteeism, what I'm talking about is related to people turning up for work who are not firing on all cylinders. They're not at their optimal condition, or they're not at their best to perform to the level that's expected of them. And most of the research would see that as being presenteeism as an issue kicking in at about 50% level of productivity. But some of the research goes to 70%. So a 30% drop in their ability to perform at peak levels. And in order to measure that, it's challenging to try and put a dollar value on it. It's much easier to put a dollar value to your organization on absenteeism, but presenteeism, what the research tells us, is about 35 days per worker per year is lost in productivity as a result of presenteeism, when people are there and they're not really at their best, or they're not really completing their role as well as they could. But of that 35 days, about 80% of that is directly related to mental health issues. So what that tells us is mental health issues tend to stick around for a lot longer. than, you know, if somebody who's got a common cold or who's got a flu and they miss a week's work. If you're at work and you have not taken time off to recover, to remove yourself from what is a chronic stressful situation, or to improve your resilience, if you like, the issue tends to not go away by itself, and it tends to hang around and linger quite a bit. That is a lot, Mary Butler, you're dead right. That's a lot. 80% of productivity lost is as a result of mental health. And 35 days per worker per year, that's pretty expensive. You could probably put a dollar value on that, knowing what your payroll would be. I couldn't do it for you. So when we talk about that, we're talking about people not taking the time to recover, and that really speaks very strongly to workers feeling judged or weak, or they're not seen to be team players, etc., or they fear harming their career. And so when we talk about that, what we're talking about is stigma. And now, when we start to talk about stigma, there's any number of rabbit holes we could disappear down. I'm writing a book on it as we speak. It's a very, very big topic, but I'm just going to skim over the top of that, just to give you a sort of an overview of what we're talking about when we talk about stigma. And Irving Goffman was probably his work is seminal. He's probably one of the best known researchers on stigma and all things stigma related. And his definition of stigma is an attribute that makes a person different from others in a social category, which obviously would include a workspace, and is thus reduced in our minds from a whole and usual person to a tainted or discounted one. And that's a very important distinction, reducing somebody from a whole person to a tainted or discounted one. That's exactly what people fear. They fear that they're going to be judged as weak or not a team player, not able to compete with everybody else. So when we talk about stigma, fear of judgment is true, yeah. When we talk about stigma, I'm going to focus on these three elements. These are the ones that come up most of the time in the research. There are other elements that are related to it, like discrimination, prejudice, bias, stereotyping, etc. But so when we're talking about this, stigma sees, if you like, and discrimination does, and prejudice and bias kind of feel. They're usually predicated on emotion and have no basis of proof behind them at all. But in terms of discrimination, is usually the aftermath or the byproduct of somebody being stigmatized. And we have loads of laws against discrimination. We can't discriminate against people for their sexual orientation, their gender, their race, their religious beliefs, etc. But it's very, very difficult to legislate against stigma because it sees. So in other words, it's until we have thought police, we're probably not going to have too many laws against stigma, because it's before it's enacted upon, and it's just people's mindset. So I'm going to talk about these three levels of stigma. These are the ones that appear in the research the most. And when I say other stigma, that would be, as an example, that would be, we'll say somebody saying, I think people with depression should just be able to snap out of it and get back to work. And when we talk about social stigma, we're talking about a group, and it's a perception. So that same person would say, who said, I think folks with depression should just snap out of it and get back to work, would be of the opinion that most people think the same thing. Most people would assume that anyone that's got depression should just snap out of it and get back to work. Self-stigma is what I would think. And in this case, I think I should be able to snap out of depression and just get back to work. And that's why I don't raise it as an issue in the workplace, and I don't talk to anybody. There's an element that's missing, and I think it's the biggest one of the whole lot. And it's an amalgamation, if you like, of the self-stigma and the social stigma. And that's where I say, I'm pretty sure most people think that I should be able to just snap out of my depression and just get back to work. And I think that's the most damaging of all. It's certainly the most harmful, and it's the one that gets in the way of what we're trying to do in reducing stigma and increasing people's inclusion in the workplace. So it's a big one that doesn't tend to appear much in the research. So stay tuned for my book later in the year, because I'll be tackling this problem and this issue very deeply. So how do we engage with our people? So I've given you a ton of stats there and a load of education. Let's talk about how do we engage with our workplace. And Gallup research just last year actually did state that 1 in 4 of our people, they can't perform, they don't want to be there, and they won't ask for help. And what that speaks to is that speaks to people who. So I'm just reading the chat there. So that's people talking to each other. Okay, I thought they were talking to me and I'd missed something. Sorry. So when 1 in 4 of your people can't perform and they don't want to be there, what we're talking about there is people being actively disengaged, and that can be harmful for your teams as well as for the individuals themselves. And it speaks back to Irving Goffman when he says it reduces people from a whole person to a tainted or discounted one. So if people can't perform, they don't want to be there, then they're clearly not feeling safe at work. And they want to feel safe at work. And people want to be able to bring the whole part of themselves to work, not just the working part that people can see for themselves and the mask that we all put on and able to turn up for work. So how do we do that? How do we get people to engage, and how do we get them to feel safe at work? Now we're getting into the sort of strategies that we can engage in, and really, it starts with normalizing the conversation at work. And when we talk about normalizing the conversation, things like the "Are You OK" Day are fantastic. It's a great public awareness campaign. If it's handled right. Here's the thing: what do we do with information from people who put their hand up and say I'm not okay? Because it's not enough to go, oh well, good luck with that. We need to know, well, no, we don't have to rescue and save people, but we need to know how to be able to support them and meet whatever their needs are at that time. And until we can do that, and until we can normalize having a conversation about not being okay, we're not going to reduce the stigma and increase their safety. But when we do, then, and it becomes a more inclusive workplace, we can do that. How are we going to do that? You need to upskill your leaders. You need to upskill HR so that we can't fix what we can't see. Well, if we can teach people to know what to look for and what to know about mindset and mental health, then we can start to do something to increase our visibility around it, and we will know what to do. And when we know that, we're normalizing the conversation. So you can see it moves from, there's a flow, an organic sort of flow to this. Let's have, I'm going to take a few minutes here now to have a look at the different ways that we can do this. How can we, in the workplace, how can we approach this issue where we can build awareness and tackle and reduce stigma? And we're talking about embedding new policy and strategy within the workplace now, and this is developing new habits. There are 5 different commonly researched strategies that are in place, and I'll just cover them very quickly here. There's a 5th one not appearing, so I'm going to present that in just a second. Public campaigns, by those we're talking about things like the "Are You OK" Day. And when it's actioned right or well, it's very, very effective. Woolworths, in fact, have just announced #AreYouOK365. So as that name suggests, every day is an "Are You OK" Day at Woolworths now, which is a great policy to have in place, but it needs to be more than a poster in the canteen or by the water fountain. And it needs to be lived and breathed every single day by normalizing conversations, and it's got to come from top down. So public campaigns are very important. New Zealand, we've got some Kiwis on here. New Zealand do this very well with their sporting people who come out and speak about their own issues. So from a public perspective, that's great. Normalizing the conversation as well. Education-based strategies. I'm thinking here about mental health first aid, which is a 2-day program that is delivered. It's a generic 2-day program that's delivered by experts who do that. It's an Australian. It began here in Australia, and it's now moving around the world. People are tending to use it in other countries as well. I think it's a licensed program, but it is generic and it does take 2 days training. But in terms of its value to society is huge, because this is something that can be used. This is something that can be used outside of work, obviously, as well. And anything that normalizes conversation reduces stigma. And we need to be able to reduce stigma publicly as well. Even talking about things like journalists and newspaper language, we need to get better at all of that. That's some terrible examples of newspaper language where they talk about people being addicts and junkies and anyway, that's a different topic. Culture and leadership strategies. I think any progressive organization would be continually looking at leadership development and keeping an eye on their culture. Particularly in the areas of mental health and stigma, because I think one definition of culture I've heard is that the culture of an organization can be measured by the lowest level that it thinks can sort of be allowed to permeate the organization. So if things like stigma or things like discrimination are part of the culture in an organization, that needs to be addressed. Diversity and inclusion is usually the domain for large organizations and international organizations. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, of course, we're talking about neutralizing gender, and we're talking about respect, and we're talking about all the good tenets of society being part of the organization. It's not necessarily the domain of small to medium organizations, unless it's just a culture that they live, but it's not usually a targeted element of the organization. Like, it's not a division or a department, or tends to not have a manager. And as a result, then, when we look at the statistics from the Australian Taxation Office, 97% of businesses in Australia are small or medium. For the vast majority of them are small, to the extent they employ up to 19 people. And then a medium is considered to be 20 to 200 people. So what do they have? They can adopt some of these practices, but not necessarily all of them. The contact-based strategies are the ones that are shown in the research to be by far and away the most valuable. And by contact-based strategies, what we're talking about, real people telling real stories and real experiences of themselves or people that they work with or their family members. And this speaks back to Erving Goffman's statement, where he says that instead of reducing a person from a whole to a tainted or discounted one, we're far less likely to do that when we are talking about somebody we know and telling a story about ourselves. There's two large organizations are very good at this. That's Ernst & Young and KPMG, I believe, have strategies in place where they have recorded video conversations with senior leaders in the organization who speak about their own challenges of living with mental health or struggling through mental health, and they're actually contactable on their intranet as well. So it's by far and away the most valuable, because it's human and it talks about people we know and it connects us in with people that we can relate to. It has to come from top down, as I say. At the very least, it needs to be from a peer. And the beauty of this is it's not actually expensive. So the most valuable strategy for reducing stigma, normalizing conversations, and including people in the workplace doesn't have to be expensive at all. as a strategy to tackle all of this. I'm just quickly looking at the webinar chat. I know I'm running out of time here, so mental health first aid be mandatory training. Some organizations do. I think Multiplex have developed their own one when it's about a day and a half. Others have tried to reduce it to 90 minutes and target it at people, but it needs to happen within the organization itself if you're going to use a mental health first aid strategy. And the definition of that's quite broad as well anyway. It's Nosh is saying it's an easy way and a great way to connect people in the organization. Yeah, absolutely, Nosh, there's no doubt at all about that. Embedded needs ongoing attention is exactly right. We need to continue the conversation, and it's got to be normalized, and it's got to become part of everyday life, Mary, that's right. So what to look for and what to do about it, if we go back to what we were saying a little while ago, in order to reduce stigma and increase people's awareness, there's a few areas we need to look at. And in terms of educating your people, which I think is the first thing we need to do, they need to know what to look for if we're going to improve visibility in the workplace. And I've broken it down broadly to 3 areas here. When I talk about mindset, of course, I'm talking about stress, I'm talking about anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and I'm talking about people who are struggling with any of those issues and can be stress or lack of resilience related. When we talk about engagement, we're back to talking about absenteeism and presenteeism, staff turnover. If you've got a high staff attrition, then there's something wrong, and we need to know why that's actually happening. Excuse me. And when we look at burnout issues, I'm talking about individuals or even at a team level, and what are the symptoms to look for. If somebody's struggling with burnout, we've missed quite a bit along the way if they're at that stage already, because it's like it runs on a continuum, if you like, and it starts with an issue, developing a second issue, maybe self-medicating, and turning up for work in less than Lisa's lost what the content of what I'm saying, or you've lost connection. We're all here. Sorry, Lisa. I'll plow on. When we're talking about burnout issues, yeah, and what that looks like in a person, if somebody's become cynical, as an example, or they've become disruptive to the team and seem to have lost the sort of motivation that you'd like to see out of them, then you're starting to see burnout becoming a problem. Then we need to look at strategies to be in place for what to do about it, and I break that down as well into 2 main areas. When I say recovery, what I mean is triage, if you like. Are there issues that are already in place that we need to be looking at? Is it an issue, or is it a crisis with somebody? Is it affecting the team, or is it individual? And then when we look at the longer picture, what we're trying to look at is prevention, and by prevention I mean prevention or early intervention, and the best way for that to occur is through normalizing the conversation again. It's not rocket science, but when we look at prevention from a public health perspective here in Australia, we spend exactly 1.34% of the total expenditure on public health is spent on prevention measures here in Australia. In New Zealand, Canada, the UK, comparable countries, it's about 6%. So we're way behind when it comes to spending on prevention. But even taking that 1.34%, and if you applied that to your payroll in an organization and said, we're going to spend this much money on developing strategies to keep our people safe, increase our awareness, reduce our stigma levels, and allow people to improve the workplace, to allow people to feel like they're really connected, they belong, the whole part of them. That's how you start to approach peak performance. And if we're to look at, I've skipped one. Here we go. Yeah. So what does that look like when we're creating a program like that, or when we're looking at a strategy? As I say, just to recap, we need to educate our team leaders. We need to educate the people in HR, the people who are connected and who have most at stake when it comes to developing a strategy like this. We need to engage our people, and conversation is the best way with that. Contact-based is best, as we said. And we need to embed this strategy into the workplace. And when we do all of that, that develops, we support our people by educating and engaging them. We deliver stability, and we reduce staff, we reduce absenteeism and presenteeism, and we reduce staff turnover as well, which leads to a successful organization that's delivering peak performance. If you want to know what that looks like from an organization perspective, on that image on the right, what we're talking about is, first of all, raising our visibility by recognizing the issues that are in place, relating to them and relating to the people that they affect. And when we do that, now we're at a sort of a tipping point. We're now engaging our teams in the organization, and by doing that, we're enhancing their performance and enriching their life, and enriching their experience of working in the organization. From an individual, if you like, they're seen, so instead of retreating, they start returning and to the organization and back to their job, so that, because they feel supported by it. And when they've retreated and they're now returning, they're back in participating. Again, we've reached a tipping point here. And as when the individual is participating and they're feeling connected and they're feeling like they're being heard and understood and not judged or made to feel less than or small, they start producing again. And when they're producing, they're enmeshed within their team again, and you've got a high performing team. So if there was 3 messages, I think, to take away from this, what we need to do, we need to increase awareness of mental health. We need to, and by doing that, we're normalizing conversations in the workplace. And it's got to be about people we know and understand. That's less abstract. We need to then, that reduces stigma that people feel, and it reduces the people's kind of reluctance or reticence to reach out and seek help, which increases our visibility and gets rid of this whole idea we can't fix what we can't see. Because now we can see it, and we can fix it, we can support people. And that improves the workplace, it improves the relationship between the teams, and it improves your bottom line, really, which is what it's all about. So if you have any questions, how am I doing on time, Julia? We'll be kicking in 35 minutes.
Yeah, no, we're good. We've got time for a whole heap of questions, given the topic.
Great, and I'd love to connect. If anybody wants to connect with me, you can see here I've got nowhere to hide. So Captain contacted me. You'll find me on LinkedIn. You'll find me on my website. You can email me. Jump onto Calendly there and grab a half an hour of my time, and we can have a chat and see if there's some way I can help you. That's obligation free, of course. There's my mobile number, and you can text me. I don't open mail from the post box anymore. No good ever comes of it, I find. So contact me these ways, and I'd love to have a chat.
Thanks so much, Mark. I think it's already been said in the chat a few times. This is such an important topic, and I have to say I've been really impressed through VID, particularly a couple of men in particular putting their hands up and saying This is an important topic, because I'm saying this as having been a female leader. My last team was about 450 people.
Right.
And yeah, I found things like Are You OK? Great initiatives, but one of my most difficult days in my career was when we had Are You OK Day, and actually someone came up and said, I'm really not okay. And it was actually, that day was actually a trigger for them.
Yeah.
To get a lot of good came out of it, but it was, they came into work and they suddenly realized that they weren't. Yeah. And then there was this whole roller coaster for them and their team and their families and everything else. So if people aren't, as you said, prepared or know how to have that conversation, and I don't think anyone's ever given me any sort of leadership training on mental health.
Yeah. And you know that the interesting thing is, if it feels like a difficult conversation, then it's really only difficult for you. What's actually happening is a good conversation. And somebody likened it to a crocodile. You don't have to be all mouth and no ears. And it's very simple to say, look, what can I do?
Yeah.
What do you need from me? Is there some support we can do here? Is there something you need that you think will help you through this? We don't have to rescue people. I'm trained. I've done years of training in what to say to them, so I'm fine. But and it actually happens, a lot. This is when I talk about contact-based strategies. Whenever I'm out in a casual situation and I meet somebody new and they say, "What do you do?" and we start the conversation, just about always it'll find its way to somebody they know who is struggling. Because a lot of the time I've done a ton of work in in the addiction space as well, and it's amazing, the stigma behind that. People tend to say nothing, but once they know that it's safe to talk to me, it just comes flooding out. Now it doesn't bother me. I get energized by that. That's fine, So I'm always up for a conversation with people around it because it's such an insipid thing.
Do you want to spend a minute?
It does touch everybody. I liken it to a mobile over a kid's cot. You touch one part of the mobile, the whole thing moves. And it's the same with people, and it's the same with the struggle that we have. And it doesn't have to be secret. This is the point. We don't hide the fact we need glasses or we need a flu vaccine. So,
Yeah, no, I agree. Andy Reid, who did a session about wearing good underpants earlier in the VID19 session. I'm not sure if you were on that one, but he talked about his own journey with depression. And so if you haven't watched that one, watch it back. It was a brilliant session. But I think that sort of contact based actually does work wonders. And you skimmed over your background at the beginning, so do you want to just sort of spend a minute or two while people are singing your praises in the chat? How did you get to be so passionate about this, and what's your journey?
I have a history of what was diagnosed as depression from the age of about 9, but because back then, years ago, 9-year-old boys didn't get depression or didn't get anxiety. Sorry, they got, that's depression. Anxiety was a housewife's problem, Bex and a lie down kind of thing. So I was diagnosed as being depressed when in actual fact it was anxiety. I was very sick for a few months. And, being a Catholic, it being Holy Thursday, I was told that if you miss Mass on a Sunday, it's a mortal sin. Even God can't absolve you for that. So I stewed in that for a few months, saying that I'd missed Mass and going to hell. So that's anxiety, right? And that flowed all the way through. About every 10 years or so, I had a major issue. But when I was working for an organization, I reached out and I said to the managing director, I said, look, this is what's happening for me. I'm struggling. And I said, one of the things that I recognize is my mobile phone, the ringtone triggers me now. And he just reached under the desk and pulled out his bin and he said, just throw it in there, be done with it. I didn't, but his line was, look, just take the time you need, meet your, the needs of the organization, but stop chasing the targets, stop chasing the budget, just bring in enough to keep us going until you get better. So that sparked me to then go on my own journey of studying mental health. And so I got a master's in psychotherapy, left me with more questions than answers. And I was working on a volunteer capacity with people struggling with substance abuse. So I did another master's in that. And now I'm at the stage where really for me, it's about marrying my corporate experience and marrying my mental health experience, because it's not often that you find both of those. That's brought me to where I am today. I'm very passionate about it. You can tell. I'm speaking at an hour.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of numbers, but I'm glad you shared your story as well, because I know what you know because of not just your deep research and study in it, but also that you lived it and breathed it as well. So thank you so much for having the courage to share that too, because you being able to share.
Yeah, it's contact based. Really, there's some people on here know me, some wonderful people I've never met, and I look forward to connecting with on LinkedIn or whatever. But some people know my story, some don't. If anyone just asks, I'll tell them. That's where it begins. It starts here, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Mark. I know there's a whole lot of work gone into this presentation, and I know you're doing a lot of research for your book, and a few people have said that they can't wait for it to come out. So I encourage people to follow you on LinkedIn, and look forward to the book launches and announcements coming out. And yeah, Monique said a brilliant example of living a message, so much gratitude. And I think, yeah, that's a really lovely way to finish. And you are what your message is, and I love you for that. So thank you so much for contributing a session.
And thank you everyone as well. Hopefully I'll be able to download this chat, will I? Because I was banging on so much, I missed so many of the comments, but I really appreciate people sharing. That means an awful lot to me. It really, really does.
Yeah. We have one quick question from Nosh. I just saw it.
Yeah,
Sorry, Nosh, I missed it. He said, would you give us your research perspective on burnout versus a high-performing team?
Yeah. Right here and now, because how much time have we got?
You've got 5 minutes.
All right. Okay. So what happens with burnout in a high performing team, you mean? I'm presuming that's what Nosh means.
Yeah, let's go with yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yes. In terms of burnout, it's usually a combination of a number of things. It doesn't happen very quickly, and it creeps up on people, and it's going to be anxiety at the very least, leading to probably towards a secondary condition, and in my experience it's usually some sort of a coping strategy like alcohol or drugs, and what it does is it reduces somebody's ability to be resilient. Dan Collins talks about mental prehab, which is a sporting analogy. Prehab is what an athlete does in the lead up to a season, so that they can train the parts of them that they think are going to let them down. So in a sense, it's like developing in a sense, it's a way of developing your resilience. But all of those things work out really, really well. But if you don't deal with the underlying issues, then it's just going to get worse, and we saw that in the statistics. So Nosh, I can understand what you're saying when you say worthless is how you felt. Well, that's what burnout is. We've reached a point where we can't feel like we can do the job that we've been employed to do. Some people describe it as, they can't drive into the car park. I can't turn left anymore, I got to turn right, I got to get away from the building. But it creeps up because we try and hide it for so long, and it's the end result of not seeking the support that we deserve in an organization. Every email was sent an undue send. Right. Okay. Yeah. I can hear you, Nosh. And look, I'm very happy. I know that we're running out of time here. Send me find me on Calendly, Nosh. Take a note of that. Grab a half hour. Let's have a chat, and we'll see what we can unearth and make sense of for you. I'd love to do that.
Thank you so much, Mark. And yeah, Nosh, if you reach out to Mark, you got a heart of gold. Well, you and your sister both have a heart of gold. So we're so glad that you guys fled Ireland and came to Australia. It's a privilege to have you over here. And
there now. Yeah. And thank you, Julia. Thank you for accommodating me. I really appreciate it.
You were on the list for a long time. So so glad to get to day 17 and have you here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all very much as well, everybody, for participating. I'm sorry I didn't spend more time reading it, but I promise I will. I'll read all of them. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. I will get you the recording and the text as soon as I can. And we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. We'll be back for our last session this morning. And then, yeah, so many thanks and everything else in the chat, Mark. So I'll get those to you as soon as I can.
Thank you very much. Stay tuned for Pip Loader, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.